Among elite players, sometimes the margins are so thin that you have to rely on one of the oldest things in poker to make sure your read is right, and that is physical and verbal tells. And that's exactly what Igor Kurganov, one of the masters of tells, does in this hand.
This hand is from the day one of the EPT Grand Final. This hand was also suggested to us by Fraser Gilmore on Twitter. If you have a suggestion for us, tweet it at us and include the link to the YouTube video.
We're going to break down what's going on during the hand, so get ready for some analysis.
Blinds 1,000, 2,000 with a 300 ante. Action folded around to Matthias Mulhausen. He passes. Igor Kurganov, King Jack off.
Expect he's going to open.
He does, with a raise to 4,000.
Oh my god, who is that?
That is Slade Fisher. He's folded, as have Gabriela Trento and Andrew Chen. Ole Schemion, Queen 7 off on the button, and that is a re-raise, a 3-bet to 9,100.
Re-raising an early raise against a really good player with junk.
Kurganov calls.
There is some history between these two. Igor knocked Schemion out of the 25k in Australia, then went on to win.
Ace Jack 6 on the flop. Kurganov checks. Schemion, with absolutely no hand whatsoever, continues for 8,600.
And this is almost certainly getting called.
Kurganov with second pair.
Only a third of the size of the pot, which is fine in a 3-bet pot.
He calls. A 7 on the turn. Schemion now has third pair.
A lot of folks are going to slow down now, but no, not Schemion. He's just going to continue bloating this pot like the gluttony scene in 7.
He bet 16,100. Once again, Kurganov calls.
So Schemion picks up what looks like showdown value on the turn here, but we know it's not really showdownable, and he knows that he probably has to continue bluffing in order to win the hand anyway, based on Kurganov's previous actions.
Yeah, I like this bet for a few reasons. It folds out some hands that are better than his. 8s, 9s, and 10s have to strongly consider folding. All jacks have to strongly consider folding. Actually, even some aces should at least think about it, just because this is essentially saying, I'm going to maybe put you all in on the river a lot of the time here, buddy, and it's a tough spot for a guy like Kurganov.
Right, of course. And at this point, after Schemion's 3-bet, bet the flop, and bet the turn, his value range has narrowed considerably, where King Jack is clearly a bluff catcher. Schemion is repping usually better than Ace 10. Ace 10 is like the very bottom of what I can see him betting for value here, and that's often a check back. Even if he had something like Ace 5 of hearts, where he has showdown value and the flush draw, that might be a check back as well. So his value range has narrowed a lot based on these 3 bets that he's made.
Agreed.
And you might be thinking that because Schemion 3-bet pre-flop, he doesn't have that many aces in his range, like you would expect him only to have ace-king, ace-queen, sometimes ace-jack. But this guy is a guy who's going to 3-bet with a lot of hands. Obviously, he 3-bet with queen 7 off. So he's probably going to be 3-betting a lot of his blockers as well, meaning his like ace X anything pretty much,
on the
which
flop
makes it a much tougher spot for Kurganov.
On the flop it does, but as you said, on the turn, it's still his range still narrows pretty considerably.
That is true.
Kurganov were ahead on the flop. He'd very likely still be ahead now.
9 of hearts on the river, and Kurganov checks a third time.
This is a super wet river card. Is Schemion going to get weird here?
He shoves. He overbets the pot.
Straights came in, obviously the flush. This is a sick bluff, and it's his best shot at getting Kurganov to fold exactly the hand he's got, sometimes even better. Right now, it's Kurganov's tournament life over second pair.
Your Roland did a different sound than it did before.
Uh-oh.
Plus your hand was shaking. It's making it tougher. I don't know. Normally it's because you're so happy that you have it. It was a friendly smile to me. Ole, ole, ole. I call.
Great call.
Sick.
We love us some James Hardigan, but he is wrong about one thing, and Ole Schemion is not overbetting the pot here. He's just betting Kurganov's stack, which is about a little more than half the pot, 47K.
Right. That being said, though, this is still a significant pot for both players, especially Kurganov, because it's for his tournament life, of course. And now it's on him to make essentially what the kids call a soul read on Schemion, because Schemion could have a lot of value here.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Now, Schemion, I think, makes a great play by shoving this river, and part of it is because the 9 of hearts comes. I believe that Schemion thinks that Kurganov would have bet a flush on the river when it comes in because he only has half a pot left anyway, and he just assumes Schemion's going to check back a lot of his value on the river.
Right, so he can usually eliminate a flush from Kurganov's range unless Kurganov is playing particularly tricky on this day, which it does not seem like he is. He's just trying to trust his reads and figure out what Schemion's doing here. So the one issue with this is I said on the turn, and this may or may not be true, that Schemion would be checking back a lot of his ace-x of hearts hands because they had showdown value, and he didn't need to call it off, on the turn, which would be kind of a bit of a disaster. If he had ace-queen of hearts or ace-10 of hearts, sure, he might bet those. But if he had something as low as ace-5 of hearts, he probably would have checked that back on the turn.
Yeah. The other thing to think about, now that we're here at the river, we think about what Schemion's shipping range is. What do we think it is? It's like ace-queen plus?
He may not even be doing it with one pair. Although he is good enough. He's good enough that he probably is. But it's got to be going through Kurganov's head that that's a thin value bet, and he knows it. Schemion's value range is usually better than one pair.
Yeah, and I think he's probably not going all in with hands like ace-10 and worse than that anyway. So I think ace-queen's probably the very bottom of it because it looks like Kurganov has one pair here, and Kurganov essentially never has ace-king. So if you have ace-queen, you're usually chopping at worst, and actually you're getting him off a chops once in a while also. So it seems like a reasonable all-in.
Right. Something that Schemion does have going for him here is that his range is completely uncapped. He could have started the hand with any 2 cards, including pocket aces.
Yeah.
He can have a flush. He can have a set. He can have anything.
He can have a straight.
Which makes it a very reputable bluff. The problem is that he ran into the Kurganov buzzsaw of live reads.
Yeah.
Where I don't know if Schemion knew that Kurganov had this library of reads on him that he's explaining on the river, which is really cool to actually hear him talk about. But I think that's really what the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, was in the hand.
Agreed. First, Kurganov points out that he is saying all in differently.
Too bad we don't have the footage of that, because that'd be a great thing to see. But we don't know the other all-in. I don't think it was televised, unfortunately.
So there's that, but he notices that he was shaking the way he shakes when he has a big hand. But then the third thing happens, and this is really key, and it's this. So that smile looks like, now it could go a bunch of different ways, admittedly, but I guess we know the cards. It makes it a little bit easier. But it does look like Schemion's trying to show Kurganov that he's comfortable, which would mean he's probably not wanting a call, right?
Right. That is a problem for Schemion here. The problem for Kurganov is Shemion's one of the best in the world. Maybe he's leveling the physical tells. Kurganov decides he's not leveling. He's actually just nervous and making the smile to try to look like he's comfortable. And it's just the first level, and Kurganov's right.
Yeah, now the other thing not to forget is Kurganov is getting an amazing price on this call, right? I mean, he's getting essentially like 3-1, 3.5-1, something crazy like that. So there's a lot. So he doesn't have to be right that much, especially early on in a tournament.
Right. ICM considerations are not as big of a thing. It's day one. It's a very long event. Right. So it's really all about chipping up at this point. At the same point, you don't want to be wrong here and be out on day one just because you decided to play this giant pot against these other best player at the table.
Yeah, fair enough. But what he ultimately looks him in the eyes, makes the decision, and shows that he is a great one. Don't go anywhere, because after this, we're going to look at viewer comments from last week's video.
If you guys want to see another soul read by an elite player, check out How Do You Call by clicking here.
That's with Davide Katai, the true master of reading all things souls. Also, check out our podcast and make sure you subscribe to this video series.
Last week we had a hand where Yevgeny Timoshenko made a really cool opponent-dependent play where he opened with Queen 10, got called by King Jack. The flop was 10-5-3 with 2 clubs. His opponent donk bet into him with King Jack. Timoshenko called. The turn was an 8 of clubs, completing a flush. His opponent bet again. Timoshenko made a super thin value raise, got 3-bet, made a soul read. I guess we're talking about soul reads this week.
We sure are.
Called, and then the river paired the board with a 5. His opponent shipped as a bluff with King Jack, not ship, but bet 200K, which was essentially a ship.
Yeah.
It's a huge pot. Timoshenko calls. He played it super non-standard, and it was really cool, and he decided he was just going to get this maniac who was trying to bluff him, and it was a really interesting way to do it. Let's hear what you guys had to say.
It's not something you really ever see with one pair, but Timoshenko pulls it off.
Yeah, it's great.
So, Kaio Klaus.
Awesome name.
We love it. On YouTube says, Grant or Jonathan, the board paired on the river, but Timoshenko knows that Ha cannot have a full house. We talked about this in last week's video. And if Ha knows that Timoshenko knows it, could not Ha be betting the second nut flush or third nut flush and still be able to be called by a worse flush?
The thing here is I don't think Ha knows it. I don't think they have enough history
Right.
for Ha to know this. Timoshenko has a plan for Ha because he's seen Ha do crazy spewy things. At least this is what we assumed based on Ha's stack and the way Timoshenko plays his hand. Ha can't know that Timoshenko has turned Queen 10 into a weird value raise on the turn.
Yeah.
Such a weird thing that I don't think I've ever even seen in any other context. So I think Ha can't possibly know that Timoshenko knows that.
Yeah, I think Ha knows it now, like post that hand, but Timoshenko's probably already readjusting again, and that's a big part of the leveling wars that are going on.
Timoshenko's going to win that leveling war in the end because he's elite.
Yeah. All right. Damon Tedder, also a cool name, says, every time I make this call, I lose to a nut flush.
Okay, well, usually your opponent's going to have at least a nut flush here because that's what he's representing. It's a huge pot at huge stakes. I mean, this is a unique situation, and Timoshenko obviously made a specific plan for this guy. He's not going to play Queen 10 against other guys at the table the same way.
Yeah, almost no one is going to 3-bet a non-nut flush on the turn unless it's a complete bluff, actually like Vimy Ha has here. But most of the time, they're actually going to have it, especially against lower-level competition. So if you're not playing against elite players or very tricky and bluffy players, they almost always do have the nut flush here, so it's not surprising that happens to you so often.
Anyway, we'll see you guys next week.
Indeed.